The first thing I remember is the sound of forks stopping midair as my sister pulled her boyfriend toward me, her smile already mocking before she spoke. Christmas lights flickered across her face when she said it. "This is the failure of our family." My parents laughed like it was tradition, like humiliating me was part of the holiday menu. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But he did. He looked at them, then at me, and his voice cut through the room. "Interesting, because you're fired. And we're done." My name is Delilah Lawson. I'm 32. And that was the moment my entire life quietly shifted. But let me back up and tell you how we got there. Because this story didn't start at Christmas dinner. It started way earlier, in a house where I learned to be invisible before I even knew what that meant. Growing up in the Lawson household was like living in a theater where everyone else knew their lines except me. Dinner happened at 6 p.m. sharp every night. And it felt like a performance I wasn't invited to join. Cassandra always sat in the center chair, right under the bright kitchen light, getting served first while I waited at the far end with whatever was left. Cold mashed potatoes, the burnt piece of chicken, the smallest slice of cake. I figured that was just how families worked until I started eating at friends' houses and realized other parents didn't automatically give their kids unequal portions. My mom, Brooklyn, had this way of making everything sound reasonable when it really wasn't. "Don't be greedy, Delilah," she'd say whenever I asked for seconds or pointed out the obvious differences in how we got treated. She said it so often that I started believing maybe I really was asking for too much. Maybe wanting the same amount of food as my sister actually was greedy. My dad, Caleb, ran his construction business the same way he ran our family. Everything had to be practical and cost-effective. Every decision got filtered through this lens of what makes the most sense. And somehow, the answer was always whatever benefited Cassandra. She needed dance classes because she had natural talent. She needed new clothes because she was representing the family. She needed weekend trips to competitions because this was her moment to shine. I needed to be realistic about my expectations and grateful for what I had. The thing that really gets me now is how they made it sound like good parenting. They weren't playing favorites. They were investing wisely. They weren't neglecting me. They were teaching me independence. They weren't being unfair. They were preparing me for the real world. I bought into it completely. When you're 10 years old and the adults in your life keep explaining why you deserve less, you start to believe them. I thought maybe Cassandra really was more deserving. Maybe she really did work harder, try more, matter more. Maybe I really was the problem. The first time I remember really questioning it was when I turned 15. I'd been taking art classes at school, and apparently I was pretty good at it. My teacher pulled me aside one day and handed me this thick packet of papers. It was an acceptance letter to this amazing summer program at the local art college. She'd submitted my portfolio without telling me because she thought I had real potential. The program cost $800 for 6 weeks. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't impossible either. Dad had just bought Cassandra a $600 dress for some dance competition, so I knew we had money for things that mattered. I walked home from school that day with the acceptance letter clutched in my hands, practicing what I'd say to convince them this was important. I found Brooklyn in the kitchen making dinner, and I spread the papers out on the counter next to her cutting board. She looked at them while chopping onions, reading through everything carefully. For a minute, I thought she was actually considering it. "Cassandra has nationals that month," she said finally, not looking up from her cutting. "We can't be driving all over town for different activities." "The program is only 3 blocks from the dance studio," I said. "I could walk there after you drop her off." Brooklyn set down her knife and looked at me with that patient expression she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Delilah, you know how important this competition is for your sister. She's been working toward this for 3 years. This art thing is just a hobby." "It doesn't have to be just a hobby," I said. "The teacher thinks I could be really good at this." "And I'm sure you could be," Brooklyn said, going back to her onions. "But we need to be practical about where we invest our time and money. Cassandra's dance career has actual potential." I stood there watching her chop vegetables and waiting for her to change her mind, to realize that maybe I had potential too. But she just kept cooking like the conversation was over. The acceptance letter went in the trash that night. Cassandra's new competition costume arrived 3 days later, a sparkly blue thing that cost more than the entire art program would have. That's when I started to understand how money worked in our house. It appeared and disappeared based on who needed it most, and somehow I was never the one who needed it most. When you grow up in a system like that, you start to adapt. You learn to expect less, ask for less, take up less space. I got good at being grateful for scraps and calling it character building. But every once in a while, something would happen that made me realize how warped our normal really was. Like when I was 17 and my grandmother died. She'd always been different from the rest of the family. Quieter, more observant. She used to slip me $20 bills when no one was looking and tell me to save them for something special. After the funeral, we found out she'd left money specifically for my college education, $28,000 in a separate account with my name on it. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, feeling this weird mix of sadness and hope. Grandma had seen me. She'd thought I was worth investing in. Maybe college would be different. Maybe I could finally find a place where being smart and hardworking actually mattered. 2 weeks later, Brooklyn sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and that patient expression she used when she was about to explain why something that seemed unfair was actually logical. "We need to talk about your grandmother's money," she said. "Cassandra has been accepted to this amazing dance conservatory program, but we'd need to pay up front for the first year." I stared at her. "That's my college money." "It's family money," Brooklyn corrected. "And families support each other. Cassandra has a real shot at making this her career. You're good at school, you'll figure out college on your own." Caleb nodded from across the table. "It's about investing where we'll see the best return. Cassandra's dance career could support the whole family someday." I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out that the money had my name on it, that Grandma had specifically wanted it to go toward my education. But I'd spent 17 years learning that wanting things for myself was selfish, that questioning their decisions was disrespectful, that being a good daughter meant putting family needs first. So I signed the papers transferring the money to Cassandra's account and told myself this was just how families worked. College turned out to be exactly what I needed, even if I had to work 2 jobs and take out loans to pay for it. For the first time in my life, I was around people who valued different things. My roommate thought it was weird that I automatically gave her the better bed and desk without even discussing it. My professors noticed when I turned in good work. My study group actually listened to my ideas. I majored in marketing because I was good at seeing what people needed and figuring out how to give it to them. Turns out that skill translates well to professional life, even if it came from some pretty messed up family dynamics. After graduation, I moved back home for exactly 6 months while I job hunted, long enough to watch Cassandra blow through the conservatory program and drop out to become a lifestyle influencer, and short enough that I didn't fall back into old patterns completely. I got hired at Summit Digital Solutions as a junior marketing coordinator, and it felt like stepping into sunlight after living in a basement. My boss actually wanted to hear my ideas. Clients responded to my campaigns. Within 6 months, I'd brought in 3 new accounts and increased our retention rate by 40%. It wasn't just that I was good at the work, though I was. It was that being good at something finally mattered. Nobody questioned whether I deserved credit for the campaigns I created or the clients I landed. Nobody suggested I was being greedy when I asked for a raise after exceeding every target they set. For 2 years, I built something that was completely mine. I had clients who specifically requested to work with me. I had colleagues who respected my opinions. I had a boss who promoted me to senior marketing strategist and gave me more responsibility because I'd earned it. Then Cassandra's influencer career crashed and burned. Turns out, posting pretty pictures of yourself doing yoga and drinking smoothies doesn't pay the bills long term. The algorithm changed, her engagement dropped, and suddenly she needed a real job while she figured out her next creative direction. Somehow that real job ended up being at my company, in my department, working on my accounts. It's just temporary, she assured everyone during her first team meeting. I'm really more of an entrepreneur, but I thought it would be good to learn the corporate side of marketing. My boss asked me to show her the ropes, which made sense since we were sisters and I knew the systems better than anyone. I figured she'd start with basic administrative tasks and work her way up like everyone else. I should have known better. The first red flag was how many questions she asked about my client processes. Detailed, specific questions about strategy development, campaign timelines, budget allocation. I thought she was being thorough, trying to understand how professional marketing really worked. The second red flag was when she started volunteering for client meetings. I should probably sit in on these to learn, she'd say. Don't worry, I'll just observe. Then she'd ask to review the presentation materials beforehand to better understand the context. The third red flag was when she started offering to help with project documentation. You're so busy, she'd say. Let me handle uploading the final files so you can focus on the creative stuff. You know how it is when you've been trained your whole life to make room for someone else's success. When your own sister starts inserting herself into your work, you assume she's learning. When she asks detailed questions about your strategies, you think she's being diligent. When she offers to handle administrative tasks, you think she's being helpful. It never occurs to you that she's systematically positioning herself to take credit for everything you've built. I didn't realize what was happening until it was already too late. It started small, files that weren't quite where I left them. Project folders with slightly different names than I remembered creating. Version histories that seemed off when I glanced at them. But I was busy with client work, and honestly, after a lifetime of being told I was imagining things or being too sensitive, I'd learned to dismiss my own instincts. Then came the October team meeting that changed everything. We were discussing the Henderson account, this huge retail client I'd landed 8 months earlier. They were one of my biggest wins, a company that had specifically sought us out after seeing a campaign I designed for a smaller client. I'd spent weeks researching their target market, developing their Q4 strategy, and creating a comprehensive plan that addressed every aspect of their seasonal marketing push. Cassandra stood up during the presentation portion of the meeting, tablet in hand, wearing this confident smile I remembered from every childhood talent show she'd ever dominated. I wanted to share my innovative approach to the Henderson Q4 campaign, she announced. I think you'll find the strategy both creative and data-driven. I sat there listening to her describe my work, not similar work, not inspired by my work, my actual work. Every research point I'd gathered, every demographic insight I'd uncovered, every creative direction I'd developed. She presented it like she'd thought of it all herself, using the exact language I'd written in my strategy documents. The room responded the way rooms always responded to Cassandra. Impressed murmurs, nodding heads, someone saying, "Brilliant approach," under their breath. My boss looked pleased. The account manager took notes on her innovative insights. I felt that familiar sinking sensation from childhood dinner tables, watching someone else get praised for something that belonged to me. But this time was different. This time I had proof. After the meeting, I went straight to my desk and opened Google Drive. I pulled up the Henderson folder and checked the version history. There it was. Cassandra had downloaded my original strategy document 2 weeks earlier, deleted it, and uploaded an identical file under her name. The timestamps showed everything: when she'd accessed my work, when she'd made the switch, even when she'd shared the new version with the team. I sat there staring at my computer screen, feeling stupid for not catching it sooner, and angry at myself for being surprised. Of course this was happening. Why had I expected work to be different from everything else? But then something shifted. Maybe it was being 30 instead of 15, or maybe it was 2 years of being valued for my actual contributions. But I didn't just accept it this time. I started digging. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. Project files I'd created, budget allocations I'd developed, client communication strategies I'd written, all of it had been systematically copied, deleted, and re-uploaded under her name. She'd built an entire professional reputation on work I'd done. The worst part was how strategic it had been. She hadn't just stolen one project, she'd been methodically taking credit for everything significant I'd accomplished since she'd started. Campaign successes I'd celebrated, client wins I'd been proud of, creative solutions I'd stayed late developing. All of it was now attributed to her in our company systems. And nobody questioned it because why would they? We were sisters. Surely she wouldn't steal from family. Plus, she was dating our CEO. That had started about 4 months after she joined the company. Jackson was 36, divorced, successful in that quiet way that actually impressive people are. I'd always respected him as a boss. He was fair, data-driven, and he'd been the one to promote me based on my actual performance rather than office politics. Cassandra had set her sights on him immediately. Not because she was particularly interested in him as a person, but because dating the CEO was exactly the kind of move that fit her personal brand. She started staying late to finish projects, volunteering for leadership meetings she had no business attending, and finding reasons to stop by his office with questions that could have been emails. It worked, obviously. It always worked with Cassandra. Within 2 months, they were officially dating. And suddenly, her input carried more weight in meetings, her project suggestions got fast-tracked, and her professional opinions were treated with the kind of respect that usually took years to earn. I watched her leverage the relationship exactly the way I'd seen her leverage every advantage she'd ever had. A mention of something Jackson and I were discussing here, a casual reference to feedback from leadership there. She made it clear that questioning her work meant questioning someone the CEO cared about. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. Every stolen file, every deleted original, every piece of evidence that proved what she'd done. I told myself I was just being thorough, just protecting myself in case anyone ever questioned my own contributions. But really, I was building a case. The breakthrough came in November when my Aunt Ruby sent me a text that changed everything. She'd been cleaning out my grandmother's house. The process had taken 2 years because nobody wanted to deal with decades of accumulated family history, and she'd found a box of old financial documents. "Found some things I think you should see," her message said, followed by photos of bank statements and legal documents. "Your grandmother wanted you to have these." The papers showed the money my grandmother had left for my education. Not just the amount, but the specific instructions she'd included in her will. The account was supposed to transfer to me automatically when I turned 18, with clear language stating it was for college expenses only. There were also notes in my grandmother's handwriting, talking about how proud she was of my academic achievements and how much potential she saw in me. My family had never mentioned any of this. They'd made the money transfer seem like a family decision, a practical choice about resource allocation. But my grandmother had intended that money specifically for me, and they'd known it. I saved the photos and added them to my evidence folder, right next to the workplace theft documentation. The pattern was so clear, it made my chest tight. This wasn't new behavior. This was just the latest version of something that had been happening my entire life. Christmas dinner was at Fleming's Steakhouse this year because Brooklyn wanted to make it special for Cassandra's new relationship. The whole extended family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, all eager to meet Jackson and hear about Cassandra's amazing career in marketing. I arrived exactly on time, which meant everyone else was already seated and halfway through appetizers. The hostess led me to a table where Cassandra had positioned herself at the center with Jackson beside her, telling animated stories about her latest workplace successes. "Oh, good. Delilah's here," Brooklyn said when she spotted me. "Now we can order the main course." I took the only empty seat, which happened to be directly across from Cassandra and Jackson. Close enough to see her performance up close. Close enough to watch him listening with that polite attention people use when they're not really engaged. Cassandra was wearing a new designer dress that probably cost more than I made in a week, gesturing dramatically as she described some campaign she'd supposedly led. The client specifically said they'd never seen such innovative thinking, she was saying. Sometimes you just have that instinct for what resonates with people, you know? I knew exactly which campaign she was talking about because I'd created it. Dinner went normally at first. The usual family updates, work stories, holiday plans. Cousin Jamie talked about her new house. Uncle Mike complained about the weather. Aunt Ruby asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers, the way she always had. Cassandra dominated the conversation, as always, but at least she was focused on charming Jackson instead of targeting me. She told carefully edited versions of workplace stories that made her sound brilliant and innovative. She dropped names of clients like she'd personally discovered them. She referenced strategic decisions she'd never been involved in making. Jackson nodded politely and asked occasional questions, but I noticed he wasn't engaging the way boyfriends usually do when their girlfriends are performing. He seemed more like he was taking notes than being impressed. Then dessert arrived, and everything shifted. Cassandra stood up, wine glass in hand, that familiar spotlight-seeking smile spreading across her face. "I want to make a toast," she announced, voice carrying across the restaurant. "It's been such an incredible year. New job, new relationship, new opportunities to really show what I'm capable of." Everyone raised their glasses dutifully. The extended family looked pleased, probably thinking this was heading somewhere sweet and sentimental. "And I especially want to thank my family for always believing in me," Cassandra continued, then turned that smile directly on me. "Even when some people in this family struggle to find their direction." A few relatives chuckled uncomfortably. Aunt Ruby's expression tightened. This was heading somewhere, and we all knew it. "Actually," Cassandra said, her voice getting that sweet, cutting edge I remembered from every childhood humiliation, "I want everyone to meet my sister properly." She gestured toward me with theatrical flourish. "This is the failure of our family." The laughter that followed was worse than silence. Caleb chuckled and shook his head like kids these days. Brooklyn smiled indulgently, like Cassandra had said something clever instead of cruel. The cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances, but stayed quiet. I sat there feeling 15 years old again, getting served last, taking up too much space, wanting things I didn't deserve. But Jackson didn't laugh. He set down his wine glass with a soft clink that somehow commanded attention. The restaurant noise faded into background hum. Holiday music became distant and irrelevant. "Interesting," he said quietly, looking directly at Cassandra. "Because you're fired." The words landed without drama, without anger, just facts stated simply. Cassandra blinked. "What?" "Effective immediately," he continued in that same calm tone. "And we're done, personally and professionally." The silence that followed was absolute. Even nearby tables seemed to pause mid-conversation. Jackson reached into his jacket and pulled out his tablet, tapping it once to connect to the restaurant's wall-mounted TV. I was planning to discuss this privately, but since we're making public announcements, the screen lit up with a Google Drive folder. My folder. Every stolen file, every deleted document, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 2 months. Timestamps showing when Cassandra had downloaded my work. Version histories proving the original content was mine. Email threads where clients specifically praised strategies she'd claimed as her own. "This is 18 months of systematic intellectual property theft," Jackson said matter-of-factly. "Approximately $180,000 worth of billable work that Cassandra claimed as her own." Cassandra's face went white. That's not..." He clicked to the next slide. Client testimonials, performance reviews, where she'd rated herself highly based on my achievements, budget approvals she'd made without authorization using stolen strategies. "HR processed your termination this morning," he continued. "Legal is handling the intellectual property violations, and the board approved Delilah's promotion to Senior Marketing Director, effective January 1st, with a salary adjustment to $95,000. Then came the final slide. Video testimonials from every major client I'd managed, specifically mentioning my strategic insights, my attention to detail, my innovative approaches. Names, faces, concrete praise for work that had been attributed to someone else for months. Delilah, he said, finally looking directly at me, has been the backbone of our client's success for 2 years. She's not the failure of anything. She's the reason our company has grown 40% since she started. Brooklyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Caleb sat back in his chair like someone had deflated him. The extended family stared at their plates, suddenly fascinated by leftover cheesecake. Cassandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing competence over theft," Jackson replied simply. She grabbed her purse and left without another word. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new apartment in Portland. Summit Digital Solutions offered me a remote position with the promotion, and I took it. I found a therapist who specializes in family trauma, and slowly, I'm learning to recognize my own worth. My new apartment has big windows and a desk where I do my best thinking. The consulting clients specifically seek me out now. Not my sister's work, not the family success story. Mine. Last week, I cooked dinner for friends, real friends who listen and celebrate each other's wins. When someone complimented the meal, nobody corrected them or explained why I didn't deserve the praise. I'm 32 years old, I make $95,000 a year, doing work I love, and nobody calls me the family failure anymore. The people whose opinions matter know better, and the people who don't matter don't get a vote.